so appreciated the opportunity for us to have him last year, and I am thrilled for you to be able to hear from him this year. And coaches, we will also have a separate coach session with Dr. Oster that follows this, this opening time together. So I am simply going to say this. He has many degrees and many accolades, but and you ought to look up a little bit more about him on the Regent website and maybe even read something that he has written. He does have a book out that's fairly new on innovation, and as innovators, it's a lot of fun to know that. But what I love about Dr. Oster is that he doesn't just talk about leadership, but he does it. He teaches in the School of Global Leadership and Entrepreneurship. He is the Dean of the Doctorate of Strategic Leadership program, which is the program that I'm a student in. And he is always ready to help and to assist and to come alongside and to tell you you're wrong and get it fixed, but also to listen to new ideas. And that's the kind of a leader that I've always wanted to be, and so I've appreciated his role modeling. He does specialize in innovation, and he has some very innovative ways to talk about it. And I hope that you will give him a great big ICC welcome and a listen this morning, Dr. Oster.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Everybody hear me? Yes. Can everybody see me? Yeah. If you can't see me, you need new glasses. You've got a big problem. I'm delighted to be with you today, especially your 15th anniversary, and congratulations to Mrs. Moon and to all of you who have worked so hard to make this a very, very special program. So congratulations. Today I want to talk about asking important questions. I'm going to see if this is a new one for me. So, first of all, before I get going, I want to talk about a friend of mine named David. David is just a terrific guy. David's from Chicago. He was born and raised there in Chicago. And besides knowing every little place in Chicago, he also knows all the great bad food places. So whenever I'm in Chicago, he always knows some little hole in a wall where we'll go get something and regret it for 2 or 3 days. He's a wonderful guy. And he worked with me. I worked in Michigan for a number of years. And he worked with me for a little while. He came up as a consultant. Now, I have to tell you, there's not I don't know how to say this well, there's not a whole lot shaking in Michigan in the wintertime. And it's wintertime in Michigan about 9 months of the year. There's just not much going on at all. You want to stay inside as much as you can. Well, while you're inside, you got to talk about something. So generally, most guys sit around and talk about hunting and fishing. And sometimes they'll talk about fishing and hunting. But both of those subjects get covered pretty well. So we talk about, all the kind of stretch the truth a bit, talk about all our great exploits and the deer that we've got and how difficult it was and all the things that we had to do. So David was back and forth between Chicago and Detroit. He got interested in this. So we said, hey, why don't you join us the next time we go out? Because, 6 or 8 guys would go at a time to northern Michigan. Anyhow, David said, sure. So he went back to Chicago. He went to his local Walmart and bought a rifle. He went to an indoor range, which I'd never been to before, and he learned how to shoot the gun. Really good at it. I mean, he picked it up in a hurry. So, but the bad thing is we could never get together. He always had to be someplace else, and our guys were all, their schedules got all messed up and everything. So we never really got to take him out. So finally, we just all decided to go our own separate ways for this year, and we'd do it next year. So Dave decided to go by himself, and he went up in northern Michigan. We gave him ideas of where to go, and he went out in the woods, very quickly got his animal, field dressed it, took it out of the woods, and as we told him, we got to be careful because it's heavy. I put it up on top of your car and everything. So Dave is driving home. He's headed back to Chicago. And he's driving along the freeway, and he's got this big smile on his face because he's going to tell he can't wait to tell his wife and show his kids what he's done. He's like Joe Hunter. So he's driving down the Indiana Tollway. And one of these guys pulls up behind him with these nice cars. Indiana police state troopers have very nice cars. Pulls up behind him, and David pulls over. He looks, he's not doing over 65. He doesn't get it. You figure he has a broken leg or something. Okay? So the policeman walks up to him, and he goes like this for his window, and David rolls it down. And the policeman looks at him, and he says, "Sir, do you mind telling me why you have a cow on your car?" See, one small error was that Dave had learned how to shoot a gun. Dave had learned how to go out in the woods. He had learned everything, but the one thing that he hadn't learned was, what does a deer look like? So Bossy's on top of the car with her tongue sticking out. Not a good idea. Today I want to talk about innovation, but I want to talk about it backwards. Here's what I mean. I want to talk about the questions you should ask. The key questions. It doesn't matter what you're studying, what you're looking at, what you want to make. It doesn't matter. What are some of the key questions that you really need to ask if you want to be authentic and have what you do count? Okay, so I only have 5 questions here that you need to ask. One thing I will say is the right questions, those that other people tell you, well, make sure you ask this or make that, are not always the most important questions. Knowing the difference between a cow and a deer is a fairly important question, but nobody brought that one up. Okay? They just assume. Here's one. The top one is, will my boss be upset if I suggest that we delay the launch? And the bottom question is, what effect could icy conditions have on the aircraft? One of those is the right question, and one of those is the important question. Which is which? Sorry? Bottom one's the important question, right? Because that should supersede or be more important than the first question. Okay? The Challenger explosion was caused by the icy conditions. Gary Hamel is a world-renowned guru when it comes to management, and he has some interesting sayings, and one of them is that only stupid questions create new wealth. Only stupid questions. You've always heard that good questions create new wealth. Good questions get you to where you want to go. Many times, it's the questions that nobody else is asking. Those really crazy, odd, unusual questions. George Bernard Shaw, one of the great playwrights in the United States, wrote that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And I guess what I'm asking you here today is, how about being a little less reasonable? How about when you look at things, look at them in a way that other people aren't looking at them? In fact, I have a friend who's the CEO of a corporation, and he sits in his meetings with the staff, and when somebody comes up with something that is so absurd, so nutty, he immediately writes it down. So that doesn't make any sense. You should just be ignoring those things. He says, no. When I write those down, almost always something special comes out of that. It may not come fully formed when I see it, but the mere fact that we've recorded something that's a little bit wacky can really help us. So don't be afraid to ask those unreasonable or crazy questions. Okay, so what are the questions that focused on authenticity and ultimately are the foundation of successful innovation for all of us, regardless of the type of innovation? Don't you fall asleep now, I heard that. First question to ask is this true? Okay, here's a question for you. Everything on the internet is true, correct? No? No? Well, I have a lot of students who think that's the case. And, they will pull stuff off the internet, put it into a paper, and it's just about as far wrong as you can get. So, no, not everything is on the internet. Not everything that's written is true. Okay, this is important that you understand to be able to sift through things and figure out what's true and what's not true. Gwendolyn Brooks on her right there, I think is, she died some years back, but she was one of the best poets ever in the United States. I went to a lecture by her, and one of my instructors was there, and he got up and he said, "You meant this when you wrote this, and you meant this," and he was waving his arms around and everything. And she stood there very nicely in the front, and he got done, and she said, "I didn't mean anything what you said. None of what you said did I mean." And he had read all the criticism and everything else, but he never read our poems. Okay? Which is important. John Adams, I was in the library the other day, and I saw a book of his, and it was 700 pages long. And the same book was right next to it, and it was less than 100 pages. I said, wow, they must have made the type really small in this one, from 700 to 100. And then I looked, and it was fairly large type. And what had happened, I went through these, I put them side by side, and looked through them. What had happened is the editor of the recent version had cut out anything that was Christian in Adam's book. And so naturally it lost a whole bunch of the book when it became just a small one. Okay? A key point is we have a professor here who constantly tells me this, and I agree with him, but he still constantly tells me this, that we have to rely on primary sources, beginning sources. Go back to the person who wrote something and look at what they wrote. Okay? It's very, very simple. Second. Yeah, okay. Who can I learn from? I've had some great opportunities to meet different people and to ask questions that people wouldn't normally ask. I lived in the country of Peru for some years, and one day I ran into, actually they came towards us, a group of men from the Shapra Kandoshi tribe. And there's 98 different tribal groups in Peru, but Shapras are really well known because they're headhunters. And today they're headhunters. And so I sat down with one of the guys and I said, this was in Spanish at the time, and I asked him, why do you guys do headhunting? And he said, you're the first person who's ever asked me that. I said, why? And he said, usually people are running away. So you're the first guy to actually ask me why we do headhunting. And so he gave an explanation that I found to be extremely logical. It made perfect sense. I didn't agree with it, but I wasn't trying to seek agreement. I was trying to find out information. There's a difference. Okay? The guy on the bottom left here, Luis Borges, one of my favorite authors, is from Latin America. And I tracked that guy all over the United States. Whenever he would come, I'd find out where he was going to be speaking, and found out when he was going to be speaking near to where I lived, and went and saw him. He came out on the stage, he was completely blind. He sat for 3 hours and answered questions from the audience in perfect English. And so I learned just a ton. The thing that I'm trying to get across to you is a couple things. One is just because you listen to somebody you don't believe what they're telling you, or you don't agree with it, doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to it. I occasionally get calls, usually from mothers, and I teach one of the undergraduate economics class, and the first thing they say is, "You're not teaching my daughter any of that liberal stuff." These are the words that throw in there. And I say, "Oh yeah, past that, I'm going into communism, socialism, anarchy, I go through the whole thing." And there's usually a really long pause on the line. And then what I say is, your daughter is going to believe what she believes. Wouldn't it be nice if she can communicate with others and be able to defend her position, to learn what those other positions are right now? And then they usually go away, almost always, go away and say, okay, I get it. I understand why you're doing that. So there's a difference between believing in something and knowing about something. Okay? So always track down who you can learn from. That's an important one. Okay. Another important question to ask is, why is this important? A couple of examples. I always wondered about these motorcycles. You see the guys going by with the big handlebars on them, and I thought, that's kind of a strange thing. So one day I walked up to a motorcycle gang, which my wife, who was with me, was like, no. And I walked up and I just said to the guys, hey, I like your bikes, they're really neat, but I don't understand this thing with the big handlebars. And one of the guys very simply said, If you have lower handlebars, it's very hard to turn your bike when you're driving. If you have the high handlebars, you can just turn a fraction of an inch, and it's not hard at all. So these guys started showing me all the things they could do with their bikes, and it was like, half hour before I could get done to get out of there. But I learned something. Down at the bottom, just a quick one. Some of the Procter & Gamble's guys, 3 of them, went to Puerto Rico, and they were trying to figure out new products, and they found a former housekeeper from Marriott, I think it was, and they were talking to her in her home, and she was cleaning, and she had a duster, but she had hooked a broom handle on it. She was kind of short, 5'0", and she used that to get up in the corners that she was dusting. Well, they came back and they invented a new product, which has sold a ton, many, many of them. So asking other people what's important and what's not important is crucial. What problem is being solved? What's actually being solved here? None of these are actual problems. Overcrowding, pollution, hunger, those are not really the problems. Those are the symptoms. Those are the symptoms. So the question is, are you willing to look beyond symptoms and really get down to the problems? Okay, alternatives. What are the alternatives? 2 quick ones. Reed Hastings there in the middle went into his Blockbuster and they said, hey, you owe us $20 in late fees. Reed Hastings says, for what? He said, your tapes are overdue. So Reed said, okay, he paid his money. He went home and he thought about it. He said, that's kind of dumb. I didn't damage them or anything like that. So he started a company called Netflix. First they were sending discs through the mail. Now they can download stuff directly to your house, okay? I don't know about you, but the Blockbusters around here are closing up real quick. They're going away. And so there's actually a new term in business that we call getting Netflixed, when somebody does something and introduces a new technology or things like that and pushes people out of business. So that was an alternative that worked. At the bottom, some of you are old enough to recognize things like the Sony Walkman and the Motorola brick phone. I bet a lot of you have never seen a cell phone like that. That was a big improvement. And then a compact luggable laptop, and those all, of course, are now built right into an iPhone. I want to tell you about Yves Bahar for just a couple seconds here. Yves owns a company called Fuse Project. It's out in San Francisco. And he has invented some of the coolest things in the world, he and his team. And basically, these questions that we've gone through, is it true? Who can I learn from? Why is this important? What problem is being solved? And what are the alternatives? Those are key questions that Yves Bahar and his group asked. And you can see some of the things that they've invented here, including the one laptop per child and the Calla Lily children's chair. That's a cell phone earbud up at the top. Just a lot of interesting things. But again, from going through and asking those proper questions. Okay? Maybe those odd questions. So here's a question. You know that's not a deer, and as my friend says, how do you know what a deer is? We haven't really shown you, but please know that that's an important question. And there are a lot of other questions when you are developing ideas or you're thinking about things that you want to do with ICC. Make sure you go beyond the superficial questions. Dig deeply. Dig deeply. Okay? Any questions? Got a haircut. Got a haircut, yeah. Any questions that I can answer? Nothing?
Are there any other recommendations for people we could look to who ask ridiculous questions, but that we could learn from and maybe follow their example, do some research on that?
Yeah, it's really easy to read things, for example, from James Dyson. He's the guy who invented the roller ball vacuum cleaner. To read things about Edison. Edison was a guy who asked all the wrong questions, constantly. Tesla in the United States was another person who asked all the wrong questions. So reading biographies on these people can really give you some ideas on just how they went about these weird things. Even Steve Jobs is a good example of somebody who was clearly asking the wrong questions, but ultimately sure panned out.
The whole issue of primary sources always comes up as your students are researching and things like that. And I know the way we approach it, but is there a way that you suggest to your students to approach that?
Well, it's something that I harp on a lot. It drives me nuts, of course, but it's one of those things where I constantly show them. What I do is I show them where I've blown paper before, where I wrote something, and then later somebody chewed me out, and I went back and looked at the original source. And not only did the original author's statement not say what I thought he said, it basically said the opposite. So, you know, when people see that, they go, well, I don't want to make an idiot out of myself, so I'm willing to go back and look at the early copies of it. There's so much available easily now that it's not a hard thing to do. So, anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Please give it up for